I have the honor of introducing to you the next keynote speaker of the morning. She is someone who is also deeply courageous and somebody who is a close colleague for whom I have known for more than 2 decades. Ninu Kang has held numerous leadership roles in her career thus far, including as the board president at both the Women's Research Center and the Battered Women Support Services. Ninu was a founding member of the Punjabi Women's Association and of the South Asian Community Coalition Against Youth Violence. Ninu was also the co-chair of the Ending Relationship Abuse Society of BC. She was at MOSAIC for almost 30 years, and she served as a member of the leadership team there, in addition to her work in the community, such as leading the Surrey Organizing Against Racism and Hate Network, which was an entity to facilitate dialogue to establish best practices and raise public awareness about racism and hate activities, and to develop response strategies to address these incidents in Surrey. Ninu has a background in an academic background in economics and counseling psychology. She has worked as a researcher and a consultant and a manager, a frontline worker and a supervisor with many community-based initiatives. She has facilitated training in the anti-violence sector and anti-racism sectors across North America and outside of this continent. She is recognized as a leader and a visionary in the field. Ninu Kang has consulted with various women's groups, community organizations regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion. On a personal note, Ninu enjoys hiking and yoga, meditation, and she loves to share food with others, as I can attest, because in July of this year, Ninu has joined the Ending Violence Association of BC as our Associate Executive Director. Ninu was born in India, and having moved to Canada at the age of 10, she says that she embraces her role of walking in 2 cultures within Surrey's South Asian community and a broader community outside of Surrey. Please help me welcome our close colleague and friend, Ninu Kang.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tracy. I should have given you the shorter version of my bio. That's so humbling, and thank you for all the personal comments. And yeah, I'm thrilled. I've been with EVA now for, coming up, I'm counting the months, coming close to a year, and it's really an exciting team to be part of. I'm also really humbled this morning to be in the company of amazing leaders, Deborah Sparrow, Honorable Judge Marion Buller, and Jody Wilson-Raybould. And so it's amazing that I'm here, and along with you, Tracy, and your leadership. Today, I will be talking about trauma-informed approaches of working with immigrants and refugees, and victims and survivors. So my goal over the next half hour is for you to gain a deeper understanding of how systemic barriers and biases experienced by immigrants and refugees get in the way of us providing them with best practices and supports and services. Additionally, I'm going to demonstrate how we can apply trauma-informed practice principles to mitigate and even remove these barriers at an individual and at a systems level. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded traditional ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And as a settler, I'm always humbled and grateful for the ability to live, work, and play on these lands. Any conversation about immigration, immigrants, newcomers must start with acknowledging that historically, Canada as a country is the outcome of European colonization, a policy that was designed to occupy and rule lands which were previously inhabited by the first peoples of those lands. So while this webinar, or this particular talk, is about supporting newcomers, I would like to frame this discussion by acknowledging something that our dear colleague, Rosemary Brown, used to say, and I'm honored to remember her during Black History Month, as she was the first elected Canadian politician to legislation, and she also ran at the federal level as well. She always used to say that if you don't identify as an Indigenous person, then we are all immigrants or descendants of immigrants to Canada. And that, you know, as the Honorable Marion Buller pointed out in her talk earlier today, that there is an ongoing struggle of the first peoples of these lands, the Indigenous people. And we all must continue to understand and engage with and support those struggles. So in order for us to look at, you know, what's the impact on immigrants today who are settling in Canada, we have to go back and take a look at early immigration patterns. So, you know, there's empirical data that shows in the late 1800s, 90% of immigrants coming into Canada were coming directly from the British Isles. And so if you look over the next 100 years, so if you look at data from about 1970, for example, you will see the trend shifted from immigrants not only coming from British Isles, but also from other European countries, coming to for an opportunity, land of opportunity called Canada. And they were welcomed because Canada needed immigrants. Now, at that time, it's noteworthy to know that less than 10% of immigrants were from Asia and Middle East. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that it was only 50 years ago when there were deliberate attempts made by policy, immigration policy, to invite people from Europe only as immigrants. This also tells us about the attitudes of people at that time. Canada was imagined as a country for the white man by policymakers, by those in positions of power, and frankly, the general public. So it's not surprising that our cultural and political systems and our workplaces, communities are predominantly designed as Eurocentric. So historically, Canadian immigration policies were created to create immigrants of color out of Canada. So we can look back historically again in the late 1800s. We can look at the Chinese Immigration Act of 1885 that required virtually all Chinese entering into Canada to pay a head tax. It started with $50 a person and quickly over the years went to $500 a person who was coming from China immigrating to Canada. Now, just to put things in perspective, at that time, the average income for a farm worker was in the early 1900s was just over $300 per year for men and about $200 per year for women. And $500 was the Chinese head tax. And again, if we look in the early 1900s, we see patterns of influx of Asian laborers coming to Canada. There was a large number of Japanese who arrived in 1907 to work in factories and doing labor work. Now, this led to anti-Asian sentiments, leading to a rally organized right here in the city that I'm working at right now in Vancouver, which escalated to riots of thousands of people who began to terrorize Chinese and Japanese residents in this city and destroyed their properties. The Canadian government acted quickly, negotiated with the government of Japan to limit immigration to Canada. And another such example is the the Continuous Journey Regulation of 1908. Now, this was prohibiting the landing of any immigrant that did not come to Canada by continuous journey from the country that they were native or citizen. So who did this impact? In particularly, this regulation primarily impacted immigrants from India and Japan, since the main immigration routes from those countries did not offer direct passage to Canada. So the question is, why is this important for us to know now? Well, it's because it's the history of our racist immigration policies, along with public opinion, that help us understand racism in Canada today. Even in the current times, attitude towards immigrants and refugees, particularly those from Asia, Africa, and Middle East, has led to a rise in hate crimes against these groups. In 2020, in Vancouver, city of Vancouver, hate crimes were up 100%. But noteworthy, hate crimes against Asians were up 700%. The truth is, Canada needs immigrants. All projections going forward indicate the need for increased intake of immigrants to sustain population size and existing social services in Canada. Couple of contributing factors. One, low fertility rates. Birth rates fell below the population replacement level 2 to 1 in 1971 and rapidly declined from 1 to 6 in 2015. And this is expected to continue. On the other side, the ratio of seniors to working adults is expected to be 1 to 2 by 2036. And again, you can see that we cannot sustain ourselves as a country if we don't have people from other parts of the world coming here for various reasons. So you can see that Canada needs immigrants, but how do people come here? What are the pathways to, and what are the policies that are in place to bring people to Canada? Well, there are a number of ways newcomers come to Canada. One is landed immigrant status, and these are individuals who voluntarily choose to leave their country. And their journey may be one of excitement and one of unknowns. They may have come over here on their, well, they have come over here on their own merit. It's quite a long process, but they might also have come over as sponsored by a family member. And unfortunately, for many of them, the excitement wears off quickly, as the settlement and integration process is usually more difficult than they had imagined. Another group of newcomers that come to Canada are refugees. They are mostly coming to Canada in fear of returning to their country of origin, fear of war, persecution, religious, cultural minority groups, for example. Could be human rights violations. They could be based on political refugees, LGBTQ, sex, gender-based. Now, there's another group that's highly vulnerable group, and that is individuals without status. These could be individuals who have expired work permits, expired student visas, migrant worker, trafficked persons, those whose sponsorship has broken down. And this is particularly an important group to keep our eyes on, because they're individuals who might be fearing accessing our supports and services at the fear of being deported and kicked out of this country. So you can see that there are many different pathways to entering Canada, and every newcomer has their own story as to how and why they came to Canada. The journey to Canada is a long one and trauma-induced. For some, maybe it's a journey of about a year if they're sponsored by their spouse to come here. But for others, it can take from 10 to 15 years being in a refugee camp, praying that a country like Canada would sponsor you. For example, my father, he came in the 70s as a visitor. Canada in those years declared amnesty and invited anybody who was in Canada to apply for permanent residence. He did. He sponsored his family. We came under family sponsorship. Even though my father chose to come here, but I remember him always saying that he had a dream of going back, building a hut near his village and spending the rest of his life there. But he would say that I came to Canada because of my daughters. He said that for him, he realized raising his daughters, Canada would provide them with more choices and freedom. Now that's his story. But in my work, when I worked at MOSAIC and in the community for many years, I had the honor of hearing firsthand stories, including a doctor from Syria who said that he had an amazing life there. When suddenly, due to war, he had to pick up and leave with his family. He ended up in a refugee camp, but fortunately for him, doctors were valued in other parts of the world and Canada sponsored him. He said he was one of the lucky ones, but he said he has a dream to go back to Syria and practice medicine and make well people of his country. Now, it's important to know that immigrants and refugees are not a homogeneous group, but by using principles of trauma-informed practice, we can build relationships to better understand and support each individual's needs. Now, it's important for us to look at that there are some common barriers that all newcomers, immigrants and refugees, have in common when they come to Canada. And some of these are probably not surprising to you, but language is always on the top. Inability to express themselves, share emotions when they're talking to you, engaging in a meaningful discussion and discuss solutions, feeling stupid and frustrated. I remember when I came, I was 10 years old and I went to elementary school and I couldn't understand people. And I saw kids on the school ground, 5, 6-year-olds, like, you know, chippity chap, talking away in English. And I thought, how is it that they're smarter than me? They're younger than me. And how is it that I'm more stupid than them? That was a feeling that I experienced not having the tools of a language to express myself. Another area is economic and employment. So often individuals coming, their credentials are not recognized here. So it's a long pathway to gaining meaningful employment. Some individuals, their employment in other countries not recognized because employers are looking for Canadian work experience. And often these individuals end up being underemployed. Another area is mental health. So trauma, experience prior to or during the flight, experiences of loss, abuse, violence. And of course, that also leads to another area, which is social isolation and integration. So due to language, work, access to communities, etc., it can be extremely isolating and you're not without your family or people that you're familiar with. And the fifth one that I'd like to share with you is cultural literacy. And this is lack of familiarity with our systems, the way things are done, legal, education, housing, employment, benefits, healthcare, etc. And again, you know, I really want to reiterate that there's this feeling, you're an adult, but there's this feeling that you are somehow just not smart enough because you just cannot seem to understand how things are working in here. And these are very common experiences of newcomers coming to this country. In addition to the above barriers, skin color plays a key role into the immigrants' experience during settlement and beyond, frankly. As I said earlier and quoted Rosemary Brown, if you don't identify as an Indigenous person, you're either an immigrant or have ancestors who were immigrants. However, our experience of being welcomed into this country is different depending on our skin color. If you're a person of color, you could be second, third, fifth generation, you may still be seen as an immigrant. And you are likely to be asked at some point in your life by somebody, where are you from? I mean, where are you really from? While all newcomers face challenges in their settlement, those who identify as white are more likely to be seen as part of the Canadian culture. Their children, children's children will likely not be asked these questions and will be accepted as being a Canadian. When it comes to barriers these groups face, racism is one of the biggest barriers newcomer immigrants of color face in accessing our services. Now, our workplaces are working towards combating racism, systemic racism, and that has led to visually more diversity in our workplaces, but we still have more work to do on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'd like to take the next 10 minutes or so, shifting over to how we can apply some of the principles of trauma-informed practice to work with newcomers. These principles are proven to be effective by research and through practices. We will then apply these trauma-informed principles to a case scenario that I'd like to share with you. So when we look at trauma-informed practice, one of the first principles is to be aware of trauma, the fact that trauma impacts our body, that there is a neurobiological impact that has on individuals, and that it's a particular state that our bodies and our minds go to when we experience trauma. So being aware of trauma is the first step. And knowing that trauma is widespread in our society and across the world is really important. We need to recognize that that there may be past or existing trauma among immigrants and refugees. And this could show up in your interaction with them. So we need to also be aware of that accumulative trauma of refugee experiences. For example, as I said earlier, living in a refugee camp for years, or even being born in a refugee camp and growing up there, past trauma experiences with authorities, fear of authorities. And in some countries, police is not always the safe place to go. The other is a loss of homeland and identity. A person that has status in their own country, well-known, knows his or her way around, all of a sudden have had a loss of their identity, their family, and people don't know them and people don't know their name, their family name. So there's also shutting down from feelings of shame. For example, I know in my work, in working with perpetrators, men who have used violence, I remember men would go to all lengths to blame his wife and saying that, you know, she shamed our family. Our family had never, ever gone into a courthouse or stepped into a courthouse. And so in addition to what some of the intimate partner violence issues are in there, there's additional feelings of shame and feeling judged here in society. There's experiences of past racism. And so when someone comes into your office, your space, and you're communicating with them, we don't know all the other touch points they've had in our justice system or our social services system, where they might have had experiences that have not been, where they felt respected. They might be experiences of overt or sometimes subtle racism. And that is coming into the room and they're coming in a conversation with you. The second principle I'd like to share with you is choice, collaboration, and connection. So with the goal to work collaboratively, giving choice is critical because it shows respect, acceptance, and it minimizes the power imbalance that exists between workers and the persons we serve. It invites the person to work with you instead of following your orders. So for example, if a police person is entering a home to a call of domestic violence, asking if you should take your shoes off before entering the home. If you're visiting a community organization for a meeting or some community coordination work, asking if they should wear head coverings or engage in any other appropriate rituals of that space. Again, these are ways to make connections. Using the individual's name, using their children's name, using the offender's name. Again, making that connection that these are just not numbers in our system. These are individuals who have real lived experience. And asking questions like, can you tell me more about how your culture deals with this situation? Be inquisitive and curious. The third principle, when we look at safety and trustworthiness, physical, emotional, spiritual, and cultural safety are important to trauma-informed practice, leading to trust, engagement, and healing. Now, research shows that when people tend to be more collaborative when they feel safe. Not surprising, right? And some ways we can do this, for example, is that meet them in a place that's more comfortable for them. That could be our workplace that we create that's more welcoming, or it could be actually meeting people out in the community. Things like asking permission if you could leave a message at their home. The other thing that I found that a lot of individuals I worked with, where they said when they've made a connection with a particular worker, whether it's a police person, anywhere in the justice system, they want to stay with that person. They don't want to have to tell their story over and over again. We have systems where we might move people through to different individuals, but that doesn't necessarily work for someone who doesn't have English as a strong tool to communicate. They have to tell their story over and over again, and maybe through an interpreter. And that leads to causing disconnection. Now, the fourth principle is strength-based and skill building. It's important for us to know that each person that we come in contact with when we work with them, that person has utilized skills and strategies to keep safe, cope with trauma, heal many times before coming in contact with us. So, but it's our job to recognize and acknowledge that in the person. A strength-based approach recognizes the abilities and resilience of trauma survivors to foster empowerment. This principle is important because we are supporting them in tapping into their own resources to enhance communication and promote healing. Some of the ways that we can do this is, one, just recognizing that it must be really difficult to move from one country to the other, saying things like how impressed you are with the ability of them to keep themselves and their children and their family safe. Also, it's, if culture and religion come up in conversation, ask things like, what traditions did your ancestors use to keep women, children safe and stay healthy? Again, you want to turn it around so that they have an opportunity to become an expert with you. So I have about 5 minutes, and I'd like to just quickly share a case scenario with you. And while I'm sharing this scenario, each one of you in whatever role and position that you're in, I'd like to not so much go into the solutions, but I'd like for you to think about if this individual or anybody in their family came to you for services, how would you apply the trauma-informed principles to this? So I'm going to share this case scenario with you because it depicts characteristics that are very similar to many of cases that I've had the opportunity to work with. This is a case about a South Asian woman experiencing intimate partner violence, sometimes referred to in our systems as domestic violence, as you know, who went through the justice system after her husband assaulted her. I'm going to use the name Raj to refer to her, the survivor. I'll call her Raj. So the police was called to Raj's house. Her husband had assaulted her while under the influence of alcohol. She lives in an extended family with her mother-in-law, father-in-law, and her 2 adult children. Her 20-year-old daughter called the police when her father was yelling at her mother, and the yelling escalated to him pushing her down, and when she was trying to get up, he slapped her. Police attended, and Raj's husband was charged with domestic violence. He was released with a restraining order. The case was out of Raj's hand, and the family decided that it would be best, after he was released, that he go and live with his sister's family for a little while. Raj asked her daughter to phone Crown Counsel and say that she wants to drop the charges because she wants him to come back and move back in with the family. He hired a defense lawyer. It cost the family $5,000, but his file went to probation officer, and the probation officer has directed him to go to counseling. Now let's imagine what she has to go through for a second. Let's imagine her daughters, her in-laws, and let's imagine her husband. As police officers, victim support workers, community-based victim support workers, STV counselors, outreach workers, Crown Counsel, counselors working with men, family law lawyers, probation officers. How do you see yourself in this case? What are the trauma-informed practices that you could incorporate when doing your work? So I'd like to bring this to a close by sharing just some of the key takeaways. In summary, we know that it's not easy to pick up and move to another country, let alone other side of the world. And these experiences cause varying degrees of trauma, depending on each person's situation. But the truth is Canada needs immigrants, but not all immigrants are welcomed here. So there are many barriers faced by newcomers, including exclusion through racism. Our systems and our workplaces are not always accessible for newcomers based on these barriers. We need to do more. We need to do more on an individual level in our personal practice, and we need to do more at our workplaces and our systems level. Now, we don't have the privilege of just saying, well, I'm not from that community, I don't speak that language, therefore I can't work with them. Justice folks, public safety folks, anti-violence workers can use principles of trauma-informed practice to understand the experience of immigrants and make connections by using very simple strategies that are strength-based of the person you're serving. Assist them in using coping strategies, help them in building on their existing skills. And we can do this. And by doing this, we can support immigrants and refugees to have the best outcome as possible when they're going through such a difficult situation. Thank you very much.
Well, once again, if we had sound effects, you would be hearing tremendous applause, Ninu, from the hundreds of people that had the privilege of hearing what you have had to say. And I will say for myself, I've been doing this work for decades, and I've attended conferences and workshops all across this country and beyond. And I've never had the pleasure or the privilege of being in front of such a concrete overview of the impacts, the traumatic impacts of migration, both pre, during, and post, and have that shared with us in a way to help us understand from a trauma-informed perspective. And so concrete you were around how we can better respond to try to portray our respect and create community and connection. So thank you so much. It was very, very informative. Thank you so much.